Hey, Stewart's Chapel, this is Don Pierson and Don Counts, and we're here at the square in Fayetteville, and this is Friday's devotion. We're in Matthew today, Matthew chapter 5 in the Sermon on the Mount, verse 13, going to talk about salt. It says, "You are the salt of the earth," talking to those, his disciples. "You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? It is then good for nothing but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. You are the salt of the earth." And then over in Colossians chapter 4, verse 6, "Let your speech always be with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer each one." This story is very much like the one yesterday. Yesterday was about the rocks of Malta. This one's about the salt flats of Malta. I needed to be educated when I first saw these because it's not something that I had ever seen before. Again, I was prayer walking Malta, and I was prayer walking, of course, Malta's all an island, all right? There's 5 islands in Malta, 2 primary, the Malta island proper, and then Gozo. This was on the Malta island proper, so it's all surrounded by the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean is absolutely gorgeous. I mean, you can see deep, deep, deep into the water. It's very, very clear. It's a beautiful sea. And so this particular village was a seashore or a seaside village, and I had finished praying through the village, and I had come around, was walking the road that went along the sea, and I came to a ledge or a cliff. Now, when I say that, there was a walkway down, but I was elevated over a certain area, and what I could see was these pans. When I say pans, I'm not talking about metal pans or anything like that. I don't know what else to call them. I think they called them flats. But literally it was a solid shelf of rock. It was natural. It was there. But they had gone in and they had carved out these pans or flats in this giant rock. And they had basically made these pans that were about 3 to 4 inches deep and about 4 foot by 4 foot. Some of them were smaller, some of them were a little bit larger, but most of them were consistently squares that they had taken chisels and carved out on the top of this rock, these flats or these pans. And what would happen is when the high tide would come in, it would cover that large rock. Now, all around the sea of Malta, where in places like this, you would find these flats or pans. So the high tide would come up, and then the high tide would go down. Well, what would happen when the high tide went down, when the low tide came, the water that had been in those flats, those holding areas that were, like I said, were about 3 to 4 inches deep, and on that rock, they would hold the sea water, the Mediterranean Sea, the ocean would be trapped in those pans as it went down. The sun, it was always beautiful in Malta. The sun was just constantly baking. It's the Mediterranean. It's a beautiful place. The sun would shine on that giant natural rock till all the water in those flats, those salt flats, till the water was evaporated, and that would leave these pans filled with sea salt. And there were individuals that had, for centuries, their families had made a living collecting the sea salt from these flats or these pans and selling it. And so when I came, it was halfway baked. What I mean by that, there was a little bit of water still left in those pans, but you could see the crystal, the white, the salt crystals on what had already evaporated on that, and it was amazing because it was actually a lot of salt. And I was watching the individuals, these men that were down there, and some of them they had completely evaporated, and they were gathering or harvesting that salt. And that salt would be sold. Salt has so much benefits. It can purify a wound or a sore. I don't know how many times my mother would tell me when I had a cold sore, she would make me gargle with salt, and later on I found out that all I had to do was just pour the salt shaker in my mouth and just leave it there, and it would do the same thing. It has healing power. It burns. It stings. It can actually hurt if you get it in your eye. It can preserve. A lot of people in Tennessee like salted ham. I don't like salted ham. I don't care how many times you boil it, wash it off, it's still way too salty for me. But it does preserve. Salt preserves. Salt offers taste. We need salt, not a lot of it, but we need some. It's crave. It's interesting, my cattle, I have one place that I keep minerals and salt. In fact, right now, I have them locked out of that area. They've been locked out of that area for 2 weeks. The reason is I want to catch the calves. As soon as I open up that gate, then the cows realize that the gate is open. You know where they're going to head? They're not going to head to that grass that's been growing for 2 weeks. They're going to head straight for that salt and mineral block. They're going to go right there, which is in my paddock. I'll close the gate and I'll be able to catch them. We need salt. It's interesting that Jesus took the simple things of the life of the people to illustrate what we're supposed to be. We are. In fact, it doesn't tell us to be, it tells us that we are. Very, very different. I'm not to be salt. I am salt. I should sting. I should provide a taste of what God is like, and how the love of God and the grace of God and the forgiveness of God. I should be able to offer a taste of that to others. I should be able to offer the preserving power, the eternal saving power that is found in Jesus. There is a warning here. I don't really know how that works. I've never seen salt that's lost its savor. I guess it can become defiled and mixed with other things. But there is a warning. I think the warning is more about, it's not so much a warning as it is a truth. As salt, we are. And because we are, we shouldn't fight against it. Because it's unnatural for a salt to be anything but salty. I wonder how naturally salty are you? You see, if you are in Christ, then you are naturally salty. If you're not salty, then there's a bigger problem, would you not say? Love you, Stewart's Chapel.